Welcome everybody to this virtual panel on gender and equity, and thank you to all of those who have joined us online for this session. I'm also aware that there may be people who are going to be joining from different countries in South Asia, and we welcome all of you today. My name is Sonal Zaveri. I'm a board member of the Community of Evaluators South Asia, and I'm also the coordinator of GENSA, the Gender and Equity Network South Asia, as well as co-chair of EvalGender Plus. And I'm really excited to be the moderator for this absolutely amazing session with stellar panelists here today. We often talk about gender equality, gender and equity, and we know that the struggle for equality, equity, and social gender justice is something that we still continue to struggle and to battle on with. How do we reach that goal? Who do we include and how do we do so? So our first panelist, Ranjini Murthy, is going to be talking to us about the inclusion and how do we ensure that when we do our gender analysis, we use the concept of intersectionality. As we know, intersectionality has been a very dear concept in feminist research and literature. But when you use it for evaluation, how is it that you interpret it? What tools can you use? And what are the different nuances when using intersectionality? So she's going to talk to us about that. Our second speaker, that's Anuradha Rajan and her colleague, Devadatta. They are both going to be talking about the sourcing, how do we source, how do we ensure that we have adequate finances in order to be able to work on these issues of gender and equity. And I will be talking a little bit more about what they will say when I introduce them as our second speaker. And we are hoping that our third speaker will also join from Bhutan, and she's going to be talking about the intergenerational understanding of the lived realities of women and how they perceive as gender equality. So before Ranjini gives her presentation, may I just introduce her? Ranjini has a background in gender and development. She has over 20 years of experience in evaluation, mainstreaming, research, training, toolkit development on gender intersectionality and development. She is absolutely stellar in the work that she does, and her sectoral focus has been on issues of agriculture, food security, poverty reduction, health, climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and SDGs. She's also worked with a number of organizations, right from the NGOs to UN organizations to national governments. And she combines both global and regional reviews with field research and evaluations. And that is why her perceptions are so sharp and acute. She has worked in India, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Moldova. I'm just going to say a few of the countries, Cambodia and Vietnam. And in the past, she has also managed programs and led an organization working on gender and development. She's on the editorial board of the journal Gender and Development and on the board or advisory committees of 4 organizations. She's also one of the faculty members for the South Asian online course on facilitating gender transformative evaluation, anchored by the Institute of Social Studies Trust in New Delhi, India. I have worked with Ranjini for a number of years, and I must say I'm always amazed by the intellectual discourse that she brings to the subject on gender and equity. Over to you, Ranjini.
Thanks, Sonal. In fact, for a very liberal, extravagant introduction of what I've achieved. It's, I must say, my achievement is more modest. I would like to thank the community of evaluators, the sponsors who have helped me get in, and the partners. I'm going to speak today on addressing intersectionality in evaluations from buzzword to institutionalization. And I would like to acknowledge 1 year developing the toolkit on gender intersectionality and social inclusion for Children Believe India, and the past work with ISST on developing, but they do not bear any responsibility for shortcomings. Is my PowerPoint visible?
No, not yet.
Is it visible?
No, Ranjani, it's not.
1 second. Okay. Now is it clear?
Yeah, if you could go into the slideshow mode.
Yeah, now?
Perfect. Just go to the first slide.
Okay. Okay. So objective of this presentation is to expand on why and how evaluation could take into account gender and intersectionality. Okay. Just to give you a background, the UN SWOP evaluation performance indicator, which encourages all UN agencies to look at their evaluation reports in that year and do a meta-evaluation. So there is a UN evaluation group has given a guidelines. It says to ask, does the evaluation have a background section that includes an intersectional analysis of the specific social groups affected by the issue, or spell out the relevant normative instruments or policies related to human rights and gender equality? But it's still vague. There is reference to intersectional analysis. It's not just specific social groups, but how the intersectionality plays out could be better spelled out. It also talks about objective of human rights, gender equality, a criterion on gender and human rights. This human rights perspective is very important. It's about right holders and duty bearers, and how far the duty bearers are accountable to the right holders with regard to gender and social inclusion. Does the evaluation methods and sampling frame the diversity of stakeholders affected by the intervention? Do the findings and data analysis triangulate the voices? So intersectionality, there is a direct reference and subtle reference in terms of human rights, diversity of stakeholders, triangulation, but it could be strengthened even more, which we will recommend later. So is intersectionality just a buzzword? Because we see intersectionality, some people using it to really talk about which women have been reached, who has been excluded, what have been the unanticipated. So it is about targeting social inclusion, but that is a very limited perspective of intersectionality in evaluation. So what does intersectionality mean in evaluation? Yeah. So firstly, let us look at what intersectionality actually means. Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality in 1989. It is now we are talking in evaluation to describe how systems of oppression overlap to create distinct experiences for people with multiple identity. So she talked about Black women. She said how Blacks are discriminated from employment, and within that, how Black women face both racism and sexism. Okay, so in Indian context, I'll be giving the example later of Devadasi women from scheduled castes who are dedicated to goddess, married to a goddess, and expected to do sexual favors to others. So their oppression is very different from Dalit men. So I think that unique intersectionality also refers to unique. Now, if you look at Fredman in 2016, he or she has talked about one is sequential multiple discrimination. That is, you experience something, say child marriage or child sexual abuse at one level, dowry harassment at another stage, yeah, And so it is sequential. It is at different points in your life. That is sequential multiple discrimination. Another is additive multiple discrimination at the same point. Yeah. For example, girls dropping out. So due to poor girls from poor families dropping out of school to go to work. Yeah. So poverty, class, gender, both interlock together. Yeah. So this is an example of additive multiple, but it's not unique. Somebody may be dropping out because of harassment from teachers. Yeah. So the dropping out phenomena may not be unique to that example. Unique intersectional discrimination is like the Devadasi system. Yeah. Or witch hunting, which goes on of single women, widows, etc. So we need to understand intersectionality as a very complex process. Both additive and unique are intersectional, but additive, you may find that same manifestation which is led by other reasons. Yeah, while unique is specific to that intersecting identities. So the types, okay, I think I've defined this. I'm not going to say, go through this slide, except telling that international human rights instruments, we have CEDAW, we have CRC, we have racial discrimination, they cannot be upheld or SDGs achieved without addressing intersectional discrimination. It is very important for justice and equity. So more on this, you can look at the Council of Europe publication. Okay. So why intersectionality is important to integrate in evaluations? Effectiveness of evaluation. Yeah, you can come to all kind of wrong conclusions if you don't bear an intersectional lens. Yeah. To say, for example, in one SC or ST village, which I visited in Tiruvallur district, the roads were very remote. Yeah. So the NGO said, oh, and some of the leaders said, you know, the roads are very remote, so the girls don't go because long distance. But there's another whole story. The other whole story is that dowry has seeped into SCs, and more you educate, more is the dowry. So if you have to interpret findings and phenomena, you need to have an intersectional lens and accountability of evaluations. We need to be accountable. Yeah. And intersectionality requires, I feel, a perspective, requires action. What can be done by that agency or that donor, and what needs to be done to address the situation for which you need to refer. It's a principle in itself. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you as an example. Earlier, I thought I'll talk about one sports adolescent girl, but I'm going to talk about a slightly different example. It's a toolkit which we are developing on gender, intersectionality, and radical social inclusion for children belief. So it has section on concept, context analysis, evaluation, next phase design, indicators. So this has been developed. So evaluation is leading to design. And this toolkit has been developed, 30 staff trained, and they went to the field. Yeah. So, so what is the evaluation component of this toolkit? To ascertain progress and challenges on child participation, health, education, gender equality. And we looked at education from a gender and intersectional lens. I'm presenting only that finding. Yeah. The 6th day was spent in training the staff. In the second phase, they went to the field and we observed some 3 resource persons accompanied to the field. We covered 20% of villages and visited Dalit tribal Muslim villages, and in particular the Madigas. Okay. Evaluation team could not be that diverse. There were very few tribals who could be part of the team. Yeah. And the transgender, trans women had left the village and were not part of the organization. So the evaluation team included SCs, but women, but we cannot say entirely reflected into a diverse perspective. So the tools which were used, some you may already know, but I want to say some of the new tools. I want to pick on one or two, only from each slide, which is stand on the status line. So the objective is to identify where children of different intersecting identities may stand with regard to health, education, etc. Changes over 5 years, that project period, reasons for change and ways forward. So design evaluation was combined with looking at ways forward. Yeah, there was no separation. And what we did is we did two very different approaches. At the community level, people of various identities, men, women, disabled, differently abled, there was no transgender who was there, they left the village. Single women, all different labels were given and they were asked, they were from the same background as the identity card, and asked to say where they are now, where they were earlier, reasons for change, what needs to be done. Then if Arundhati, who's the most backward among SCs, comes and says, I think me and my community is in 6, then we'll add a girl to that identity and ask what will that position be. Then we will add one differently able. So like that, it went on. And with the NGOs, as we gave them different identities from their reality. So we put transgender, we put, other things which we wanted to and try to explore. So this is the stand. It worked very well. It was very very revealing onto many of the discrimination and intersectional issues. And the other one, which was very, the fox and the crane story, many of you know. I'm not going to repeat that story of how you give a plate of saucer to a thirsty fox and crane and asking who could drink, and saying, have you ever flown like the crane before? And it works well for adults and 15 plus. So if you want, to know more about the tools, maybe you could put in the chat box and I reply as the sessions go. The first set of tools are intersectionality tools, which we have engendered. The second set here is gender transformative tools, which we have made intersectional. Okay, so the two are different, and perhaps what you would like to hear about is the control over body mapping, which Pallavi Gupta and me did with the NAS Foundation, extent of control of adolescent girls and women over the different body parts and what can be done to enhance control over the body. So we did this with individually with women of different identities. Yeah, and one exercise, we pinned women of different identities on the wall, which was a group exercise, and asked them to compare. So this, again, if you want to know more, you could get back to me. So if you want to do such an approach to evaluation and followed by design, we need participants from all marginal identities. So it quite happens that people with disability don't turn up, trans people don't turn up, yeah, and go to the house of participants who don't come, who are in the village. Go chase the people who have gone outside, like trans, get their address, etc. We need a strategy to deal with power holders. whether it is panchayat leaders, whether it is men. Yeah. So privacy and timing. Have counseling support if there is need. You can't just intrude, ask, and go away. So this is something, intersectionality sensitive tools. Yeah. Now I want to come to what came out and also touch on what are the implications for evaluation. So the key performance indicator of this organization is the number of boys, girls, young women, men who gained increase and sustained access to inclusive and quality education, vocational skills development, boys and girls. So this is what their outcome is. And the organization actually works with the child. They have child learning centers to building their confidence, in particular from Dalits, Adivasi communities, single women, children, yeah, children born out of wedlock, all that. So child, family, meeting with parents, community. There is, child protection committee, which also focuses on education because it's a child protection strategy. Schools, institutions through school management committee and larger society. So education scholarships are given to very poor SCST, yeah, and Muslim. Child accountability groups have been formed, strengthening of SMC, school management committees, and research. Now, what are the findings? I'm going to just pick on just one in each slot because I don't want to cut into the others' time. Institution of family community. They said, for example, dowry has increased, yeah, with education. Oh, I can't see. Okay, dowry. So there is a reluctance to not educate too much of the girls, less than the boys. Yeah. So I'm just giving you one complex. Yeah. And there was one where facilitating what are the changes, negative change which has happened, but not due to the project. The positive change they said is education performance improved because of attending the child learning centers. Yeah. Remote villages is still a problem. So what are the facilitating and hindering factors? Adapting Naila Kabir's post-field analysis. Separate women's organizations at village and project level linked to state level ones. This is a facilitating factor which is being used for advocacy. Yeah. And to monitor. Education scholarship, CLCs, I've already mentioned. Hindering factors, most BCs have gone to private school. So the segregation is happening. Government school is by SC, ST, and private by BC, other community. So I'm just giving other playground segregation, kidnapping of adolescent girls and boys in remote SC, ST. And this is coming girls for sex trafficking, boys for organ trafficking. This is what was reported. Yeah. Shockingly, in Tamil Nadu. So I'm not completing everything. I just want to say at the market level, 25% quota is there for the schools, private schools, but not implemented. And the organizations are yet to track this. So this came up and now they are evolving an action plan. Private sector contract farming, come to the SC, ST village remote and pick up the girls to go and work there. Yeah. So all this, for the marriage, we'll give money, that kind of talk. Yeah. Lack of employment. Yeah. Young women not allowed to work. Okay. So there is groundwater depletion came up. So time to fetch water increased. So, girls have to do it. So that is another factor which came up. So state, we have already, we have commented that while infrastructure has improved, it's not really disability friendly. Sexual harassment, they are saying is, come down over the years due to the project's work. SMCs with SC/ST representation in place, outright discrimination has reduced. This is what the people said. But at the same time, the subtle discrimination is there of, people going, the BCs going off to private. So what happens is different quality of education. With the BCs gone, the teachers do not feel entirely accountable. Yeah. Facilitating factors, presence of village development committees and federations under NRLM, hindering, sexual harassment come down, but still is there. Schools not equipped to teach children with, not motor, it should be sight and hearing disability. Sight and hearing, they're not equipped. And if they have to go far, they don't want to send the girls. Yeah. Quality of education in government schools has come down with scooting of other caste. Okay. So what are the strategies they came up? I'm not giving the entire list, just a few. Link block level federations with state level to monitor 25%, and within which for girls. Strengthen federations to monitor and take up sequential multiple intersectional discrimination that have a bearing. Strengthen Anganwadi presence so that in SC/ST, so that girls are not pulled out. Yeah. So CCTV camera in buses to address gender and caste discrimination. Work with parents on addressing discrimination because, and this I want to say, while women are not empowered, I won't say all women, but I would say while women are discriminated, but they may discriminate against their daughters. And that is the reality. So there is a need to work with parents as indirect duty bearers too. Strengthen water bodies, etc. Now, what is the lesson from all this on evaluation? Reduction in sequential, multiple and intersectional discrimination can be assessed only partly through summative evaluation, which you finish now. Yeah, but evaluation which track progress across life cycle, that is very important. Here was a case, they said, oh, that woman, she attended CFAM, she has come back, and now CFAM is a child rights group, and she has come back. Her in-laws are asking dowry, they've sent her back. So I think we need, if we are talking of empowerment, we need to track through a life cycle period, not just the project period. There could be several combination of multiple additive discriminations which lead to one phenomena, like SC/ST dropping out. So I said gender, caste, class, marital status of mother, many things could be, and we need to not generalize. Yeah. Evaluations need to examine reduction in unique intersectional discrimination. Yeah, like I said, there was Devadasi system in part of Tiruvallur. Yeah, I think even kidnapping of these girls in remote areas, yeah, it's a location, class, gender, all coming together. So, it's very absolutely shocking, and even selling of bodies of boys. So, this is, I think, my last slide. Gender and intersectionality needs to be integrated into each DAC criteria. Because unless we understand the ecosystem, environment, and social political economy through intersectional tools. Yeah. So it is, we need to look at the DAC criteria afresh, and how to integrate this into all. It is important to engender existing intersectionality evaluation tools as well as weave in intersectionality into gender transformative tools. Of late, I'm seeing a lot of manuals which just talk about gender, male, female, and intersex, men, women, trans. I think we need to go beyond. Yeah. Findings could be analyzed through social relations framework and force field. What are the facilitating, hindering? How do you use the facilitating, whatever? But within that, also look at environment, because which has a close relationship with what is happening. Evaluations from a gender and intersectionality lens is about power, including what we have over women with marginalized identities. It is hence important to follow such evaluations with planning. And I feel any partner organization needs to plan what it can do, and invite others to come in. Partner organization, donor. Because intersectional perspective is also intersectoral, it is also wide to the entire ecosystem. So which means the ways of working in terms of territorial thing has to move. Yeah, actions that one organization cannot do can be recommended to another. I can't read the last. Ecosystem approach. Can anybody read it? Sonal, can you read it?
The ecosystem approach is required to address gender and intersectionality and should be examined in evaluations and influence analysis, conclusions, and recommendations.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the ecosystem is so important. We look at education as one sector, but it is influenced by transport. It is influenced by Anganwadi centers being there, what happens in school, and equity issues between who goes to which school. So I think a broader lens is required. And thank you. And sorry if I've overshot my time. Thank you very much. And actually, this has been the most learning experience for me, building a capacity of 5 partners of one organization to evaluate from intersectionality lens and to plan. Thank you. I'm grateful to them and to the women and men and boys and girls who made the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ranjini. You were definitely not over the time. And it was such a rich discussion. It was such a discussion that I think we were all spellbound listening to you. And there were lots of nuggets that you have, included in your talk, and perhaps we'll have time for questions later on. Very, very interestingly is about the different types of tools you mentioned, and I'm sure there will be lots of people who are interested in it. So if there are any links that you could provide, if you could put it into the chat box, I think we would all be very, very curious to learn more about it.
Yeah.
You told us how important it was, as a concept to translate it into evaluations and, how to do it. They gave us the practical tools about it, the experience behind it. And I think most important as a principle, how important it is to be included. And I really like the fact you said, you have to get it into the DAC criteria. You can't just talk about it and not do anything. Please do put your questions in the chat box and I'll be monitoring that and we'll have an opportunity once the other speakers have spoken. So now I would like to invite our second, two speakers together who are going to make a presentation. And that's Anuradha Rajan and Devdutt Purkayastha. So Anuradha is currently the Honorary Executive Director of South Asia Women Foundation India, and that's a national women's fund. And she has been working on gender rights for over 2 decades and is currently a PhD scholar at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And she just informed us that she has defended, and we are very happy, and I'm sure that she's going to be passing with flying colors. And I was really thrilled to hear that, because that's my alma mater too. They are going to share the presentation, and Devdutt Purkayastha, who is a development sector professional with over 12 years of experience working in the domains of monitoring, evaluation, research, and documentation in the grassroots non-profit organizations. So she's currently supporting the South Asia Women Foundation India in its learning and development initiative. So they're going to share their PowerPoint presentation, and we really look forward to learning from them about some of the work that they're doing. And what I find very interesting is they're going to talk about the philanthropic landscape in India and how do you finance feminist movement building. I had the opportunity to do an evaluation of a movement building, and the resources that are needed for it are something quite different from being project based. It's much longer term, and it requires a very larger vision of where we want to understand gender and equity rights need to move in the way forward. So over to you, Anuradha and Devdatta. Are you able to share your screen? Great.
Is it visible?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Oh, yeah, hi, I think, okay. Thank you so much. I think it's, first of all, I'd really like to thank the community of evaluators and Sunal and the co-panelists on this, in this session, and all the people who've joined us. I can't see everybody, but to say that this is a very opportune time to be talking about feminist movement building, given the kind of climate in which we are working, given the climate in which social transformation, social justice issues are being challenged in the everyday. And so how do you really garner resources to do this kind of work more effectively is what we will be speaking to as a National Women's Fund. Women's funds essentially are a mechanism that works to ensure that resources, largely financial, but also non-financial, flow more decisively towards women-led, self-led, trans people-led organizations and collectives working at the grassroots, who are very often left out of decisions, as well as left out of discussions around where the money should go, where resources should be parked, and what should be the agenda. So as a Women's Fund, we are very committed to actually working very closely to influence, advocate, educate, as well as claim resources which need to rightfully flow towards grassroots organizing, towards transformative work. So for us, working with money, people with money, and with finances is very important because it's a very central way in which power is exercised in I think, all of social justice, in the social justice arena. So this is what we will be speaking to in what we share. Yes, please move forward. So before I begin, I'd just like to lay the landscape of what we mean by feminist movement building, just to not assume that we are all on the same page with this and where we are coming to it from. And I think given the rich experience, I just want to encapsulate what we are trying to do as what we mean by feminist movement building as drawing from the work of Srilata Badliwala, who has written extensively and one of the I think most prolific theorists, feminist theorists from the global south. So she talks about movements as a set of people with who share a common experience of injustice, who come together, get organized to build their collective power and leadership. And she specifically talks about feminist movement building as being based on a very important, deeper understanding of how power structures operate, especially how patriarchal power operates. And I think it's important to state this, even if it is obvious, before we move forward to, as I said, to not assume, but to say that this is a common understanding with which, as often, we have approached what needs to be resourced within feminist movement building, why feminist movement building itself needs to be resourced, and what we mean by it. So from us, from our understanding of feminist movement building, it really draws from this definition given above. Talks about, so we are supportive of collective actions which move towards a common goal, and it's about definitely dismantling structures of patriarchy working at the community and at every level, meso, micro, as well as macro. Yes, please go ahead. why are we saying it's important to invest in feminist movement building? Just to lay that context also before we go into what have been our insights on resourcing feminist movement building. Essentially because feminist movements provide the most comprehensive, holistic solutions for wicked problems. Wicked problems are problems which do not have linear solutions and even do not have multiple solutions, but where a number of intersecting factors that Ranjini talked about earlier impact a particular issue. So it's climate change or gender-based violence. These are wicked problems because they are long-term. They require multi-pronged approach and a lot of different stakeholders to come together. And so movements have, I think, they provide holistic solutions. Feminist movements do for such issues. They also address systemic injustices. That is why they need to be funded. They move away from strengthening only individuals to also building collective action and strength, which is very central for normative change, both at the level of systemic norms within systems, which are formal systems, as well as norms within informal systems of power and control. And they are really the most effective and lasting routes to ending inequality and justice, which is experienced by so many women across the globe. And I found it very interesting when we were doing a review to say, and this was a review done by two researchers in the US, who say that more than a left-leaning political party, participation of women in government or any other economic factor, it is feminist movement building which has had the most lasting impact on policy responses to violence against women. And that speaks a lot to why it is important to invest in feminist movement building. And the reason I think I'm just belaboring this point is to say that this is very important. This is a very important part of the whole framing of resourcing for feminist movement building, because it is seen as something which is not amenable to the kind of law frames and to the kind of positioning that a lot of philanthropy expects. A lot of the impact and the kind of results that are very concrete and that philanthropy tends to support. But the fact remains that social change in the last so many years has been, so I think on social justice issues, the change has happened in a decisive way because of movement building, which is not always amenable to law frames or the kind of expectation of results that philanthropic communities tend to privilege. Yes, please move forward. Yeah, I'll just hand this over at this point to my colleague Devdaka, but before moving, I just want to say that what we'll be sharing now is really our insights from two different kinds of processes that we engaged in as a feminist fund, as a women's fund, sorry, in evolving our own funding agenda. So our insights really flow, what we'll be sharing flow from a scoping study that we did, scoping process that we did, on what should a feminist funding agenda look like, and really then in trying to recover or trying to develop this ground up based on our conversations and on the insights we got from talking to several different women's rights groups across the country during the COVID pandemic, and also based on our understanding of what the philanthropic landscape really seems to offer in terms of support for gender equality and women's empowerment. So I will pause there and request Devdaka to continue.
Thank you, Anuradha, and thank you, community of evaluators, again for this opportunity. I'm very honored to be presenting in this distinguished panel today. So as Anuradha mentioned, today we are presenting the findings of two of our exploration studies conducted in the last 2 years. One is Taking Our Claim, Resourcing for a Feminist Agenda, which was conducted last year amidst the second wave of COVID-19. And the other one is a philanthropic landscape mapping that was conducted in mid-2022. So the scoping study is based on the voices of the organizations working on the ground, and it aims to evolve a feminist funding agenda in the pandemic scenario. The main research objectives of the study were identifying and amplifying the needs emerging from the ground during the pandemic. So our aim was to evolve a feminist agenda for social justice that captures and brings attention to the different thematic areas and forms of institutional support that are needed to nurture organizations led by women and trans persons. And secondly, to build a case for feminist funding agenda for much needed social justice work and movement building, especially in the context of the emergencies and crises like the pandemic that we have seen. The other exploratory research was conducted to map the Indian philanthropic landscape, in which we aim to understand donor perceptions, willingness, and challenges in engaging with supporting women's rights and women's empowerment work. So we began with a light desk review way back in November 2020 and built on it during the second wave. The desk review included studies undertaken by feminist organizations and CSOs. Out of a larger pool of 100 documents, we assessed over 39 research studies, policy briefs, and academic papers covering a large range of intersectional themes. A field study was undertaken thereafter, in which we wanted to understand the direct experiences, challenges, and needs of organizations in the context of COVID-19 and the lockdowns that happened. It employed a feminist and intersectional lens and approach to ensure respect and sensitivity during the research. And we conducted this research with 47 organizations who were interviewed during the second wave. These organizations work on women and trans persons' rights to livelihood generation, land ownership, education, healthcare, reproductive and sexual health, leadership and role in governance, and against discrimination and inequality. So this is the analysis framework that we applied in our study. The research findings are organized in two frames. The first one is that of effects, both immediate and long-term, and needs, and the second one is that of needs that emerged among vulnerable communities during and soon after the lockdown. So the first frame, that is of effects, it's a temporal frame and is drawn from Beena Agarwal's research, which explores gendered effects of the pandemic, both immediate and visible effects, as well as the longer term sequential effects which unpanned during the unlocking phases. Immediate and visible effects include deteriorating food insecurity, financial insecurity, loss of jobs and livelihoods, distress migration, domestic violence, and police violence. And long-term sequential effects include the increasing burden of women's care work within the home, inability of women to return to paid work, loss of access of education for young girls. The second frame, that of needs, it examines the varying qualitative dimensions of gendered needs and interests emerging during the pandemic. This frame is drawn from Maxine Molyneux and Caroline Moser's still relevant research on practical and strategic gender needs. Practical gender needs include access to food provisions, relief measures, health services, and protection from gender-based violence. Strategic gender needs include the need to collectivize, participate in political life, and gain control over land and economic resources. So some of the practical needs recommended by the organizations and collectives whom we spoke to during the research were that all the groups who worked in the rural areas felt the need for creating sustainable livelihood opportunities in the villages, as they felt that this could prevent unsafe migration that happens. In the code box below, as you can see, an Uttarakhand-based organization, women's rights organizations, shared the need for sustainable agricultural practices in rural areas to enhance food security. The earnings of many trans people dried up during the lockdown, and they had no access to PMJDY schemes that were only extended to cisgender women. Thus, the formation of SHGs and providing skill training among trans persons in setting up small-scale enterprises was recommended as a sustainable revenue-generating options by all the groups that we spoke to. The national relief package announced by the government helped tackle the immediate food insecurity, but not the underlying systemic undernutrition and malnutrition due to the lack of diet diversity. According to the desk review that we did, relief packages should include diet diversity. Also, according to 2020 studies by iWage and Tata Cornell Institute, PDS coverage should also extend to trans persons and persons living with disability without insisting on identity proof, gender certificate, or disability certificate. Dialogues and discussions about contraception and decision making regarding reproduction are currently inadequate, according to the organizations. The hampered access to reproductive and sexual health due to COVID-19 makes it essential to address these needs on an urgent footing. Several of the groups felt that there is need to strategically build digital literacy and reimagine innovative multimodal formats for expanding movement building work. The strategic needs that emerged and were recommended by the organizations and collective, which came out strongly during the research. The first one being that now more than ever, the organizations whom we spoke to, they felt the need to intensify women's mobilization, consciousness raising work, and solidarity building. They felt this as a need as they witnessed years of movement building work and awareness generation work around girls and women's rights, such as education and right to delay marriage being affected. Many women's groups also felt the need to connect physical movement building work with digital efforts, given that more crisis situations like the pandemic may constitute our realities in the future. While we are still recovering from the socioeconomic crises emerging during the pandemic, other emergency situations due to the effects of climate change and economic crises continue to impact the lives of the vulnerable communities. Hence, one of the needs also was felt about the preparedness for emergencies and the crisis situations that now constitute our realities, and the need to focus on resilience building and that need to surface in resourcing agendas. The critical work done by the women and trans rights organizations during the pandemic cannot be overstated. This immediate collective action was only possible due to the decades of mobilization and solidarity work that the groups were doing on the ground with their communities. Among all the participants interviewed in the field research, they engaged in relief work. This relief work was directed by the strategic needs of the vulnerable communities, apart from the tackling the practical and the visible. It could only take place due to the decades of investment in movement building work done by the groups on the ground. Other roles that were taken up by the groups during this time, during the lockdowns, were to generate awareness on the various aspects of the pandemic, which continue to happen. And then many of the participants coordinated with the district administration for helping returning migrants to reach their homes safely. Organizations working with children and adolescents tried to bridge the gap of education that had happened with the closure of schools. And several organizations in the field research took up initiatives on addressing mental health issues. We spoke to organizations based in Delhi, Jharkhand, Odisha, Kerala, West Bengal, Rajasthan, who set up mental health help desks to help women deal with abuse, violence, anxiety, and financial problems that had aggravated during this period. So our field research shows that while the staff of several women's rights organizations have braved the situation and soldiered on, they have in fact subsidized the state's relief work and rescue work. By working at reduced wages and taking unpaid leave to sustain their organizations, women have subsidized both relief operations and investment in broader social change work. So this raises concerns about more demands being made on women and trans persons groups that are already stretched without adequate funding and institutional support, while glorifying their courage and resilience. Therefore, we felt that effective and adequate resources have to be claimed by them and advocated on their behalf to ensure that the work is being supported more effectively. So these are some of the insights, direct quotes that we have taken from our study. One of the chief functionaries of a women's rights group based in West Bengal talked about how funding was cut during this period of time and they had stopped receiving reimbursements, and later on proposals were also indefinitely delayed. So then how do they take their work forward? Similar way, another chief functionary from a women's rights organization based in Jammu and Kashmir talked about a lot of support going to project-based funding, and that is a very reactive way of funding, and it should be there is need to have more sustainable funding, looking at good processes and looking at essential vulnerabilities. So with this, I hand it over back to Anuradha to share the remaining about the building blocks of resourcing a feminist movement building work.
Thank you. So what is it that the landscape, the mapping of the philanthropic landscape, how is it, what is it telling us, and how does it resonate with what we heard from the groups on the ground? I think it has given us both these sets of insights from our mapping of what we heard from philanthropy, especially those who were, many of whom were already engaging in work on gender equality and empowerment, on women's equality, on gender equality and empowerment. Seems to suggest that, so when we put these two sort of pieces of insights together, what we found was that the building blocks of resourcing for feminist movement building seem to have certain sort of there's certain important building blocks which come up when we talk about resourcing for feminist movement building. The first one that we took back from the scoping study was the need to increase access and increase interactive spaces where both people seeking resources and where the resources exist actually can come together. So increasing access and more interactive spaces in terms of carving more spaces where funds are approachable for groups to be able to directly engage with funding processes, to articulate their needs and manage these on their own. As a women's fund, for example, when we launched our fellowship program last year, we were very mindful of the fact that given it was COVID, given the fact that many groups that are working at the grassroots do not have access to the internet, they are not able to fill Google Forms, they're not able to, their accessibility is so low. We made a very conscious effort to keep the application process as accessible as possible. People could write, people could send in a recording, people could send in a video if they wanted on the fellowship, for the fellowship, that we were trying to look for people for. So to try to keep the space as accessible as possible for a wide range of people who don't have the facility of language in that sense, verbally are very good but are not able to write. So these kinds of methods, I think we heard, were very important in ensuring that the needs and the work that is actually happening at the grassroots gets amplified, gets access. In this context, I just want to say that what we heard from the donor community, on the other hand, was also that while many of them are in principle interested in supporting work on gender equality, the problem they face is about accessing reliable, well-known, or rather not well-known, but more reliable and good partners that they can access who are doing work on gender rights and who have connectivity to the last mile in the community. So what we are hearing is that there is a need from the ground, from grassroots groups, about resources to do and continue doing their movement building work. There are resource agencies which are willing to support more in a projectized and program mode, but are willing to support work around gender equality, and that the spaces to bring them both together is actually what is also a challenge many times. So the role that women's funds can then play in bridging that kind of a role and in bridging that kind of a gap and creating those interactive spaces is what we took back. Listening and resourcing priority areas identified by groups is what we learned is very important from the voices on the ground. For example, we had one group from Jharkhand, Hazaribagh, Jharkhand, who said that you must revise long-term projects immediately with new strategies. Right now, there is no focus on network building. Networking is happening only with a group of partners that are part of a particular grant, but obviously movement building requires a broader set of coalitions and alliances to be built, so that we need to resource that kind of work. So what we also took back from hearing voices on the ground was the need for such platforms, for such convening spaces where dialogue could be had, where there could be more conversations on what should be the agenda for funding. And what we heard from the philanthropy community, on the other hand, was again the inability, or rather the lack of spaces to hear these voices adequately. And I would also say the lack of efforts on their sides to create such platforms. So we do feel that's a very important part of the feminist funding agenda setting, so that the agenda is really led by women and trans people on the ground. Yeah, can you just move forward? As just one final piece I would like to say of the building blocks of feminist resourcing for feminist movement building is that both from what we heard from the groups working on the ground as well as our assessment of the philanthropic landscape, I think there's an urgent need to move resources flexibly across both practical and strategic needs. And this is even more imminent right now because we are dealing with a multitude of crises, both in the country as well as in the region. Whether it's conflict, whether it's fundamentalism, whether it's lack of livelihoods, there are practical issues to be addressed, and there are strategic needs in terms of building solidarity, building collectives, and mobilizing. But what we also are cognizant of here is that very often the language and the kind of discourse that gets constructed around feminist movement building actually distances many times resourcing for it, because this language is only understood by a very select set of people. So in terms of unpacking this language, demystifying it, so that's why when we started with feminist movement building, it's important that the language itself is very intimidating in many contexts. So for resources to move flexibly across practical and strategic needs, especially strategic needs, what we took back from the landscape mapping was the need to have more engaged conversations on building a narrative which speaks to the needs on the ground and demystifies it for those who are holding resources and are in principle interested in supporting it, but somehow the language seems to be very distancing. The politics, of course, is distancing, but how do you create a middle ground to bring the two together? And the need for flexible funding models. And again, we found resonance of flexible funding models in principle with the philanthropic community. But again, the need for very specific, the kind of measurement details, the kind of log frames, the kind of indicators, and the language of outcomes, the structure that is put into measuring impact, all of that actually distances, and I think makes funding very, very difficult for small groups working on the ground. So the need for taking funding models which are more responsive to the constraints that groups face, which are also able to make the funding model flexible to the needs that emerge from the groups working on the ground. Especially during COVID, we saw that women's funds across the world, when we are part of a network, the Prospera Network, and the Asia Pacific chapter, for example, raised more than $2 million in flexible funding, which was unrestricted funding for women's rights organizations to work in that community. So the need to bring in more people into this and to create, I think, the evidence to show how flexible funding models actually enable you to get a greater, in a sense, in the mainstream language, the more, the return on what you get is very high because you're finding solutions fundamentally to problems. And what we took back from both the scoping study as well as the landscape mapping of philanthropy was the need to really invest in institutional strengthening and resilience building. This is something we heard from both ends. To say that in order to strengthen institutions, it's about, of course, building the hardware, which is around building meta systems, ensuring compliances, finance, and all that, which is needed to keep the institution running. But institutions don't get created for social justice because they want to be good institutions on finance. There is a very important agenda which they want to promote, which is social change. So even for the funding community to understand that while that hardware piece of it is very important, it is important to also keep going back to the software piece. And maybe that is also the hardware piece on why we exist and what is the relevance of social justice feminist organizations. So to really invest in those processes, and we recognize that at some level, it is a very instrumental approach because a donor would typically like to have a well institutionally strong partner, and so they would like to invest in institutional strengthening. But I also feel it's a good opportunity because it's about not just building the the hardware, as I said, but using it as an opportunity to convene thinking on feminist movement building and deepening the work that one is doing. So I just want to kind of close here by saying that we as a Women's Fund are trying to listen, or rather to kind of keep one ear definitely on amplifying the voices from the ground, but also looking at what is it that the philanthropy, how can the philanthropic community become much more engaged, much more responsive, much more, and not just responsive in a knee-jerk kind of a way, but in a much more long-term and in a partnership mode, to actually start having dialogues around feminist movement building, and that this does not become something which is discussed only in very select circles, but how do you really take this dialogue out there and create a bridge for both philanthropy as well as for the grassroots work, which is so important to be able to talk to each other. Yeah, I'd just like to end with a quotation that we got from a chief functionary of a women's rights organization in Western Uttar Pradesh, and she said that rural grassroots organizations are overlooked. They must be encouraged, donors must be encouraged to look at women-led, Dalit-led grassroots organizations, because Dalit women rarely hold positions of leadership. So she talked about how the donor community must use its own assessment by visiting, listening, engaging, and being humble to the kind of work that's happening on the ground, rather than imposing frameworks that are created in some offices somewhere in terms of what the change agenda should be. So I'll just end there, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anuradha and Devadatta, that I really don't even know how to highlight, summarize, or talk about the points you've raised, because they've been absolutely mind-blowing. And I really liked the fact that you are talking about both the demand as well as the supply for resources, and how we need to have a dialogue. I mean, it was heartening to know that the philanthropic community who can donate and provide resources is willing to support such organizations. And, to have that dialogue, but possibly they don't know how. So what you were saying, so important, the flexible funding. And Rashi Agrawal has also mentioned that flexible, long-term institutional building, network, coalition building, this is where change happens. It's not by these very small, discrete project base that one does. And we've been there, done that. And so we really need to think of a different model. And thank you so much for highlighting these aspects. I'd just like to remind everyone who's on the call to please put your comments as well as the questions in the chat box. So I'm going to move on to our third speaker, and she is from Bhutan. Her name is Funsho Choden, and she's an independent consultant and researcher in social economics, culturally responsive evaluation, social capital, and well-being. And she received a PhD from the business school in the Queensland University of Technology, Australia. And she also has a Master of Business by Research and Economics from the same university. Master of Arts, Bachelor of Economics. So she has an excellent academic background. Importantly, she has more than 20 years of experience in government, academia, and the private sector. She started a career as a civil servant, and she worked for the government till 2012. Currently, she's an independent researcher, and she engages in academic work, including teaching, research, mentoring, and as a reviewer. She's passionately involved in the fields of research and evaluation. She's also the chair of the Evaluation Association of Bhutan, and she's the member of the Community of Evaluators South Asia. She works with us on the board, and it's a very different perspective from Bhutan. She's also the advisor to YEE Bhutan. And she's going to talk about something, very, very interesting, is that we talk about SDG 5s from a very indicator target point of view. But what is the perception on the ground? And not just, women, but women of different ages, from different regions, and so on. And it reminded me a little bit about the intersectional lens that we needed to add on, which Ranjani started off this panel discussion with. So I think this would be very interesting to know from primary research that Munsho has done about what are the different perspectives intergenerationally and how one must interpret it in terms of the aspirations, the perceptions, the changes that are happening across these different intersections of age and location and other criteria. So over to you, Funsho.
Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Very clearly, Funsho. Would you like to share your
screen? Sorry, because my computer is not supporting this virtual background, and so my background doesn't look good here. Anyway,
we can see the beautiful hills of Bhutan, you know.
Okay. I'll try to share my screen.
So can you share your screen?
Yeah, I'm trying to share my screen now. Yeah, okay. And okay. Thank you, Sonalji, for my introduction, and also thank you, Community of Evaluators South Asia, for giving me this platform to present my very small scale research on understanding the gender gap in Bhutan by tapping into the lived experiences of women from different generations in Bhutan. And this research is a very small scale, as I have said, and it is basically motivated by the principles of culturally responsive evaluation and the gender responsive evaluation. And the core to the gender responsive evaluation or culturally responsive evaluation is to have a local knowledge base, which talks about our context and our ways of people's way of living. But then while I was very much interested in promoting the culturally responsive evaluation and gender responsive evaluation in Bhutan, and on the other hand, I found there's a dearth of literature on understanding the gender differences, especially based on how our people or women are experiencing in the country. So that's why I started this research, and that was the motivation for the research. And the main driving question for this research is, what are some lived experiences on gender equality of women from different generations in Bhutan? And basically, the main purpose of this research was to inform the gender responsive evaluation framework, which we were planning to work in the Evaluation Association of Bhutan. And then we really wanted to, in order to do that, we wanted to understand what is the local knowledge existing in that. And also to understand the real lived experiences of women. And we could not really find the literature, so I thought like I could start this small research to just try to understand how our women are experiencing the gender equality throughout different generations. And this was part of the research funded by the small grant 2020 of EVAL Gender Plus funding, focusing on equity, focus, and gender responsive evaluation framework. So that this research got the support from this small grant program. So this is the brief background about this research. And then let me talk about the methodology I have adopted for this. And this is really exploratory qualitative study where I have used a 3-generation study. And this study was done during when the COVID was hitting the country and all over the globally, right? So the interview was conducted between September and October 2020, and due to the many restrictions because of the pandemic, I talked to I talked to the participants and given the choice of like how they wanted it. So I followed their convenience, and some chose to be in person, and I met them in person. And but on the other hand, some really wanted not to meet me in person, so they chose to do by phone and as well as email. So there are diversity of approaches I used here. And this is also one of the unique thing I have in this study. And if I talk about the sample, I have a purposive sample and consisting of 20 women in Bhutan, in Thimphu, who lived in Thimphu. And why Thimphu? There are two reasons. One, Thimphu being the place where I live, and it was convenient for me. And also, other thing, Thimphu is capital of Bhutan, and where many families coming from different regions of the country live. And during the COVID, it was very difficult to travel and to go out of Thimphu. And it was very much reasonable to go to different families coming from different regions of the country who lived in Thimphu. So that were two reasons. One was the convenience, and other was diversity of family, which was convenient for me to meet during the COVID restriction time. And with this sample, I had two families of 3 women generations. So that's making it 3-generation exploratory research. And I have interviewed 3 families of 2 generations, and mothers, singles, and young girls who were above age 18 years. So these were all diversity of people I have met, so that I could get their perspective across different generations and the different experiences they have faced in their life. So, with this methodology, what I did was I did open-ended interview questions, and the interview touched upon 4 main general topics. Firstly, the questions about their experiences of growing up at their home, and second, the questions were focused on their current situation, what are their experiences about the life, their work life and their home life, and etc. And thirdly, on their future aspirations about the future generation. And also the question focuses on the 4th area was on some topical issues like how they have been impacted with COVID, and their perspective on SDG and the gross national happiness, which is the development philosophy of the country. So these were the 4 different topics I covered in the interview, talking to them and trying to bring out their experiences and their perspective about their life and what they aspire their future girls or future daughters' life in the society. So these are the 4 areas I've covered. And then to analyze the data, I have used the thematic analysis of the transcript I had from the interview and the written responses I had from the email. Some people used the email to respond to me, and so I have analyzed the transcript and written responses using the thematic analysis. And from the entire data, the 4 main kind of themes came out clearly. One as a parental or the family home, where the important or significant sub-themes like parental roles as their role model, and the gender differences at home life, and also the schooling opportunities, and which they talked about. So these are the three sub-themes which came out of the parental or family home. And second theme is the life at schools and universities, where how they valued their education, how their parents valued their education, and also the living through the school life and university life, how gendered school had been or university had been to them for their experience. And third theme is on the workplace and society, and also the attitude towards women, and where the two sub-themes came up as like changes have happened, and some have seen it, dramatic changes which happened during their life cycle, and also there are perspective where the changes still needs to happen in order to have gender equality in Bhutan. And the last theme is coming out as an outlook for the future, where they talk about the aspirations for their future daughters or granddaughters, and that really had two prominent sub-themes, which is self-reliance and leadership, and their aspirations about how the younger girls should promote themselves and go into the leadership role and be self-reliant, not having to depend on their spouse or husband and all these issues. And then secondly, the next sub-theme was gender equality as ordinary, and they really wanted gender to be just a simple identity, should not be hampering them from all things they wanted to achieve. So these are some of the themes and sub-themes which came out from the data I had. And now I will take you through some of the verbatims I have captured as an example, really talking about, firstly talking about the parental and home, family home. Most participants talked about how parents and how families around them have shaped their lives and their experiences as they grew up. And one of the participants, she, a 47-year-old, said that my mother was an independent and strong woman. She inspired me, and she was my role model. I have lived up to her values in every sense. So this is how she sees her mother shaping her experience. And also another participant talked about how father was her role model, like father being a judge, and how his work and the leadership inspired her so that she is successful in her professional life currently. So this is how they have really seen their father, mother, and their parents shaped their lives and experiences. And also this role modeling of parents had occurred across all socioeconomic spectrum, not only for those who had a father who is of a judge in a high position or something. So some participants really talk about how their families were disadvantaged, and that gave them the inspiration to do well in their life. And one of the participants clearly talked about her parents was not educated, and that she saw the disadvantage because of being not educated, and these circumstances inspired her to do well in her life. And also other participant talked about how poverty at home when she was younger drove her to be stronger and do well in schools and do well in life. So these are some family environment or family roles that really played important or significant role in shaping their experiences and their life and their success in the current life. And now, when we talk about the family and the role they have played in their experience, in their shaping their life, they also, on the other hand, they also talked about how gendered the home life had been. And as a family life growing up was gendered in both as in a subtle as well as to the extent of explicit ways. And some participants talked about how they have been sanctioned by their family members for voicing their opinion, but this has not stopped them doing it, I think. And society's expectation about girls, about girls and women, and how they need to be obedient and soft-spoken are still there, I think. And when women are more opinionated, they didn't like that. And these are some experiences they had at home. And one of the youngest participants in my sample group, that in her teen, she was free-spirited person, but family often reminded her to be the mainstream girls and be less opinionated, and she did not really like that kind of environment, and she went through a rebellious kind of teen. So these are some experiences talking about at home life, families and parents shaping their experience at the same time, how gendered it has been for some of them. And now next, coming to the school life, and again, school life had been also gendered, though many participants talk about how the parents wanted them to be educated, go to schools, and to be accomplished person in their life. And though at the school, how gendered it had been, and the girls were seen that their confidence may not have been seen as befitting as a girl. And one participant clearly said that, I remember at school in the past and now in the university, my male friends be loud and dress untidy and no one really pays any attention. But if she's loud and voice her opinion openly, she's labeled as too confident. And that's there is expectation for the girls, different expectations for the girls to be timid and shy and all this experience the younger girls are sharing. And also one of the participants also shared that the middle schools tends to be very getting very sexualized a lot, and people becoming more judgmental about how girls should be acting and how she looks, and they put a lot of attention on the physical attributes of a women, and growing up through that was not easy for them. So these are some of the experiences the girls are sharing in the schools. And now coming to the workplace and society, attitude towards women, there are diverse perspective. The older participants have seen dramatic changes in women's role across their own life. As earlier, the women were always treated as secondary to men, and in gathering, irrespective of women's position, men were offered higher seats than women. But this practice have changed now, and this is seen as so much a significant change they have seen over their life cycle. And also, people in the past used to see the leadership role as only for male, but this perspective have changed now, And now everywhere we see the participation of women in full swing. For instance, we have women ministers, and also there are many female figures, prominent leading female figures in many organizations. Even at the village level, women are playing a very active role in developmental activities. So these are some of the changed perspective women are experiencing, and they are expressing these changes they have seen in their life. But on the other hand, there are also the participants who argue that women still do not have the equality of opportunity as men in the country, and they talk about all these settled, gendered expectations there in the society, and they are saying that there is no explicit rule that excludes the women from any opportunity, but we have a very settled, gendered expectations or comments around how women should be, and which is quite difficult, which sometimes makes it quite difficult to put things across to other people, and these subtle gender differences are deeply rooted not only in men but in women ourselves. So which really becomes a big setback for them. So these are some of the experiences shared by younger participants in my sample, and how settled, systematic issues are existing, which revolves around the patriarchal system that is existing in the country. And lastly, coming to the future aspirations about future generation. So an example of verbatim here is gender equality as ordinary. So for some participant, gender equality was about women's achievement being as normal, meaning that there are fewer barriers in their way due to their gender, which means if their achievement, they aspire that appointment of women in different positions should not be a big accomplishment to celebrate, which really makes it, if you say that, okay, someone is appointed to a higher position, and that means, and we need to celebrate this accomplishment, that really indicates barriers in their way due to their gender. So they don't want to have this kind of being abnormal treatment as an accomplishment, something to celebrate, but let it become as normal as it is in what it is for the men. So this is what they aspire at in their future, and also they aspire that they never have to think about the gender that would hinder them from doing what they want to achieve, and gender should be just a very small part of their identity. So these are some aspirations they have for future generations or future time of women in the society. And these are some of the findings or verbatims shared by the participants in my study. And based on all these findings, the main thing is the gender equality, as we all know, is crucial for the real inclusive transformation. But it is very difficult to say that there is equality if we do not know how the women are living, how are their lived realities are. So that's why it is very important to talk to the women themselves, try to bring out their stories, and so in that way to inform the program, inform the projects, or inform the policies that are to be developed for the people or for the women themselves, and in promoting the gender equality in the society. So it is best to know their lived realities. How is it for them? And so this research gave an opportunity to really bring out their perspective or their lived realities of the women in Bhutan. And other thing is the perceptions. From this research, we could see that perceptions have changed and opportunities have opened up for women, especially with the increased access to education, and because of that, many more opportunities have opened for women, and their experiences have improved and their life have improved. But still, there are structural issues that maintain a patriarchal system where the expectations or the gendered expectations about women, settled ways about women, and all these issues are taking time and taking time to change. So there are some things are slow to change, even in the country where the population is so small. So though there are opportunities and the life of the women have improved drastically from the past, but there are still the systematic and structural issues that takes time to change for the women, and that would hinder the the promotion of gender equality in society. And now some conclusion to draw from this very small scale research is the education system and the family system are the most important structure for the interventions to happen. So for any interventions in promoting the gender equality, in promoting the gender equality needs to know their education structure and family system. These are some important structure where interventions needs to take place in order to promote the gender equality in Bhutan. And other thing is strategies to achieve gender equality better rest with the people themselves, and it is very important to listen to them and to discuss with them and to hear their lived experiences, their realities, understanding what they are going through in order to develop any policy or any interventions, or for that matter, or any program in promoting the gender equality. So the strategies coming from the people would be the best strategy, I think. And lastly, the evaluation. And when we talk about evaluation is the process where it tells us what worked and what did not, and what program worked, what did not, which program did not work, and who are the left behind ones, and who need to focus in the next program or policies or any projects. So if the evaluation is not designed or not relevant to the people, or the design of the evaluation is not relevant to the people, then we will not be able to get the right answer to what worked or what did not, or who is left behind. So in that way, the evaluation, if we really want to progress or transform, have a transformation that is beneficial to everyone, the evaluation must be relevant to the people. And the relevant evaluation will be based on local knowledge or local wisdom. The evaluation informed by local knowledge, local wisdom, gender responsive evaluation, culturally responsive evaluation are some evaluation that could really promote or that are crucial in fostering equal society that can benefit everyone. So these are some conclusions I can draw from this very small scale research which I have done, and this is in trying to, in an attempt to understand the lived experiences of women in Bhutan. And the main purpose of this research is to contribute to the local knowledge base for promoting gender responsive or the culturally responsive evaluation. And there are a lot of limitations to this study because this study was carried out during COVID time, where there were a lot of restrictions, and as well as it's a very small sample based study, and also like, but this has some. I really feel that this brings significant contribution to the literature, local based literature on understanding the gender gap or the real lived reality of women in Bhutan. And as a future to this, it would be good to also carry out a similar study, finding out the men's perspective or the different generations' men's perspective on how the time has changed on the gender perspective. So this would be like some aspirations for the future study. So with this, I would like to end here, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Funsho. You've given us a very interesting perspective and the real voices of women of different ages from Bhutan. And thank you for that. Before I come to the many questions that are already there in the chat box, and I will come back to you soon, Funsho, because there are a number that relate to your presentation. I just wanted to go back to the question that Janvi had posed earlier to Ranjani, and she had asked about how did the organization, you could stop sharing, Funsho, that's fine.
Okay.
So Janvi had asked about, how did the organization receive the methods and analysis using intersectional analysis? And I think Ranjani has already answered in the chat box, so please do have a look at it. There's one question that was a follow on by Janvi, which perhaps Ranjani you could talk about. And this is something quite practical. How much additional time and resources were required? So if you could answer that, Ranjani, and then I'll go to the other questions. Ranjani?
More than additional financial resources, it is knowledge of where the most marginalized people are, whether it is SCs or STs or Muslims or whatever, and knowing girls, boys, or women, men with disability, and so on, and finding. So it is knowledge as a resource. You need to have worked there. You need to have worked there for several years. It is, and I feel unless and until the NGO has done in-depth work, and or the evaluation leaders and evaluation members have in-depth knowledge of the context to ask. I think intersectional evaluation is very difficult for outsiders to come and do. There is some kind of social sensitivity which is required to know the context. Now they are doing it by themselves.
Okay. Thank you for that, because Ranjana, you brought up a very important point about who does the evaluation and what is the role of the evaluator as a facilitator for enabling local people to do the evaluation. And I think you brought a very interesting area, through this answer that you have given. And I think we haven't done enough about it. We talk a lot about it, but in reality, often we do come into everything. We are the experts and so on. So there are a few questions that have now come for Funsho, and they're quite specific. So I'm just going to club them together, Funsho. One of it is that was there something that was typically Bhutanese, coming from that culturally rooted Bhutanese perspective that you saw? Because a lot of it could be, applied to in any context in South Asia, but anything particular that you thought that the theme was unique to Bhutanese. And there was also a question from Janvi about, what differences showed up in the schooling. You mentioned in the workplace, but were there any differences that came up in the schooling itself? And then there was another question also that came through, and I'm not sure, but Ratna had mentioned about whether there was any resistance to integrate gender equality in the school curriculum and whether that influenced any of the outcomes. So wanted to also, if the study participants had that intersectionality, that we talked about. Did you choose your sample, although it may have been small in size, but was there any criteria that you had that you chose the participants from different groups, and whether their location, their class, other ethnic considerations that I'm not aware of in Bhutan, but you would probably know. So over to you, Pucha.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for interesting questions, and there are a number of aspects I need to answer here. And the first on the uniqueness to Bhutan is basically, I think most things are generally applicable to the whole of South Asia region, I think. And only thing is there is, it's very difficult when it comes to the gender perspective and also the system, the existence of the systematic and structural aspects, like where there's patriarchal system existence and all these gendered or settled issues are there in Bhutan. But only uniqueness in Bhutan I could see unique to Bhutan is most things are happening in much more settled way, and you cannot really explicitly see that out, but there is there within you, and you have to really dig that out, and that is the unique to Bhutan I saw. Yeah, otherwise it is mostly applicable to rest of the South Asia region. And in Bhutan, we always talk about we have gender equality, and it's not exactly correct. You have to really dig deeper to find out what is the difference there, and you still have the gender differences. And other question is on about the schools, right? About the schools, school, when it comes to the school enrollment, and if you really look at the current stage, if you really look at the performance in schools and school enrollment numbers, you could really see that you cannot really see the difference in gender. So everyone is enjoying the same kind of right and all this. But then again, as I mentioned, in the settled way, if you really want to find out the expectations of girls and all these are still there, and I think that is again, like you cannot really see explicitly, but there's some differences is there. And but when you talk about the valuing of valuing of school and education, even at the home and even within the older generations, some families have really promoted the education for girls and women as equally as men. and that was a bit unique to I think in Bhutan. And now in the younger generation, the perspective is very different from the old one. And what was the other one question? Was resistant in schools, right?
Yeah, I think you've kind of answered that, but there was also one within your sampling. Did you have any sampling criteria? Yeah.
Oh, I did not have any criteria in mind. The only thing was I was looking at the families who had 3 women generations, and so I was trying to find more of that family with 3 generations who are willing to participate in my interviews, but it was hard to find, and few who are there, they were not willing to give interviews. So I landed up only with 2 families with 3 generations, and then few more with 2 families. And I did not have such criteria, like stringent criteria, but I looked at if I can have more of 3 generation families. That was one of the criteria. And I really wanted to mix of mothers and also single women who never had families. And these are a few criteria I had, and the perspective of younger generations here.
Thank you.
Hope I answered, or anything I have left out?
Yeah, I think that's fine, Punsho. And I think Ranjani has posted about, some interesting findings from her work about girls wanting equal access to play similar sports as boys. So clearly, an aspiration coming from, when we're listening to the voices, like Punsho's study shows, that we see a change. We see change in what girls are imbibing in terms of their own rights and their status to be more equal. I also really liked this whole, the second statement, Ranjani, about children wanting that all children should eat together. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I'm not sure how that has happened, and whether it's the work of the organization that has done this to bring that sense of, actually to practice day-to-day events in a way that there is no discrimination. You don't have to even target who is a scheduled caste, who is a scheduled tribe, who is what, but we are all equal. We are all humans and we are all children. So that's very interesting. There is one question that is actually for all of you. And the question is for each of you, and I'm just scrolling to read out. Let me see where I am. Correct. So this question is directed to Debrata and Anuradha and to Punsho, but let's come to Anuradha and Debrata. That what would be some of the core considerations while doing a gender-sensitive study? So you have mentioned, I think, about what you did about the practical and strategic gender needs. But if you wanted to, talk a little bit more, that if somebody was going to go in for a study, what is it that you would want them to definitely do? Anuradha?
Yeah, I can speak. Yeah, I'm pressing the mute button so that those works. Thank you. So I think it's an important area, and I guess it also depends on the kind of issue one is studying. But I think at a broader level, I would say the certain principles which we need to adopt, whatever may be the thematic or the issue that one is studying in. Based on, I think, our experience within the Women's Fund, we feel that one is being very cognizant of the fact that people occupy so many different identities, and to be very respectful of that, and to really create a space for people to say what they want to say and listen very closely. And this is something we consciously do in terms of hearing from the ground what seem to be the agendas and needs that need to be resolved. So I think having that sort of holding the space for the person to be able to say things without I think judging is very important, and to create that safe space. for people to speak. So I think that is very important in any sort of a study, gender or otherwise, but that I think for women, and when I say gender, it has got more, it means much more than women. But I'm saying to create that space where people can speak safely without feeling judged or without feeling evaluated. That I think is very important. And the second thing which I would like to, second is supposed to see that gender doesn't just mean men and women or male, female. There are like so many different identities one can occupy. And to be very, I think, mindful about that also. So one of the things that we have started doing is being more mindful about saying, how would you like to be called? Would you identify as a what? So it's a way of acknowledging the identities beyond the semantics of it, acknowledging and respecting that people can have different identities and they are very, so to keep that space inclusive. I just want to come in here from the evaluation perspective. Something that I found very important is that in any, whether it's a study or an evaluation, I think it has to be a win-win for both parties. And very often as evaluators, what we landed doing is we have all the aha moments because we are collecting all the data, we're doing all the analysis and the insights. The people who commission evaluation very often are at the receiving end of those insights. And I think that is actually, doesn't create the aha. It's the aha is for the consultant, or the aha is for the person on the outside. So how do you ensure that even those who are commissioning evaluations or programs or people in organizations or nonprofits become an active part of the data analysis along with you? It is time consuming. It means more resources. It means having more workshops. But the sense of accomplishment that they find when they read the data themselves and say, oh, this is what it means, then embedding that into the program cycle becomes that much easier. So not make it, so I mean, just to say that I think very often we sort of overlook, or rather in the name of efficiency, we sometimes feel it's more efficient to do it that way, but I think this is just such a powerful process. And so to not have it like a extractive process, but to say that the aha is so creative, and you take it back with you and embed it into your program. So I just wanted to share that from an evaluation perspective. I think that's really important.
Do you have anything else to add to that? Devdatta, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, just resonating with what Anuradha just said in the second part of it, about the accountability that we also have as evaluators when we are working with women and trans people's community. So the data that we are collecting and the relevance of it as an evaluation to the community that we are working with, taking it back to the community, the insights and what we derive from it, bringing it back to to them, and also understanding the relevance of it. Otherwise, like we will not be able to get the desired results at our end, as well as at the same time, once we are able to derive the insights, bringing it back to the community that we are working with. So that's quite essential and critical is what I feel for a gender sensitive study design. So this design itself should have that dissemination mechanism also to bring it back. This is what I feel about. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much. I really liked what you mentioned about, we often talk about accountability mostly in the upward direction, but not in the downward. And it's really important that we, do that now, no matter how many hours you require, resources and time. So it's a commitment, basically. I think more than the resources, it's a commitment. And also in terms of gender analysis, what you mentioned, beyond this intersectionality and all that we've talked about, not to make it binary, the gender, men and women, but think of, trans and other marginalized who, we kind of just keep on the fringes, by the by, and so on. And, that reminded me of how Ranjani was mentioning that if they don't show up, you go at them, find them and bring them. So sometimes you have to be very practical in your approach to make sure they are at the table, and they have to be at the table if we want to have an inclusive discussion. Funshu, that question was also directed to you. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention for a gender sensitive study? I know you mentioned that we need to listen to the resources, to the voices of the people on the ground. Unless you know the lived in experiences, you really don't know. And unless you understand the culture, as you said, you had to really investigate in a way and get the nuanced understanding of where the structural inequalities still exist in a fairly progressive society. Anything that you want to add on when you're doing a study, any consideration that you need to do when you do your analysis?
Yeah, a very interesting question, and I would really agree to my the earlier speakers saying that when we look at the gender, we should not look at only as a gender as a binary. That is very much applicable even in between society. And now we have spectrums of gender, and that is very important to consider, I think. And other thing, when while studying gender, we should not only focus on women group. I think we should focus on different gender spectrum, and not only focusing on women. And just now in my study, I have focused only on women, and that was the biggest limitation I had in my study. And basically, like getting familiar with them, and not only just instantly going and interviewing them. You have to get familiarized with them, know them well before you ask questions. And that those are some gender responsive approaches, or culturally responsive approaches, I think. Getting and knowing them, knowing their family, and before you start asking them questions, I think.
Thank you for that, Funshu. And I really liked what you mentioned, that you have to have some rapport building, especially in the qualitative methods that we're using. Whether even it's PRA, whether we interview, we listen to their voices, and wherever you in different parts of the country, as Anuradha's research was. The fact is that you need time for rapport building. You cannot parachute into a community and expect to extract the data, leave. And definitely we are advocating that you come back. So Rashi has mentioned for Ranjani that, and Ranjani has mentioned about, evaluations by the people who know the context. And, this whole perspective of self-exclusion. Very, very interesting how you have worded that, Rashi, about how you need to be proactive and how you have to go and get them into the room where the discussion takes place, because their perspective is equally important. And for various reasons, they are not coming and being with you. So anything that you would like to add to that, Ranjani, about, because, it's really the process of doing evaluation. We are looking at evaluation findings, but how we do it, who is in the room, is equally important. So any insights would you like to share on that, Ranjani? And perhaps if there are no questions after that, we could maybe close from them.
I just want to share just one very quick finding. One is, go and search for those who are not there, but also find out who is left the village, migrating part-time, and leaving behind their daughters.
Right.
So we do an evaluation in the brick kiln site, but left behind are adolescent girls. What is the protection measure, and what is the protection of small children in brick kilns, because they leave the adolescents? So these are some of the very, the knowledge has to be there with the evaluation facilitator. Sure. I want to say one more additional thing, which is something which ISST and on that, gender transformative evaluation course is doing. which I hope some of you may get interested in. Sonal is also deeply involved, is introducing the social equity assessment tool. It goes a bit beyond gender because it looks at equity, not only between women and men, but also between different groups of women and different groups of men. So that is something which we need to do. We cannot look just at women, men, and transgender. Which women, which men, so the equity. And the other thing which it adds is the environmental perspective. Yeah, if you look at it, what has happened to the environment. We could also add the human rights perspective. So you look at the tool, it is there in the chat box.
Thank you so much for that. So before we conclude, and I'm really happy that, we've been going on for 2 hours and it doesn't even seem like we've been going on for that. And, everybody who joined us have actually stayed with us. So I always look at that number towards the end, and that tells me how fascinating this panel discussion was. I'm just going to give 1 minute to each of the presenters is, to provide a conclusion, a concluding sentence, or some insight that you would like to share. Just 1 minute for each one of you. Would you like to go first, Funsho, since we ended with you?
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And also, I would really talk about how again, the evaluation and local wisdom-based evaluation and culturally responsive evaluation or gender-responsive evaluation, how important they are, because at the moment we are embracing the transformation, greater transformation and change, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. And the equity and the real transformation has become a real issue. So that's why we need to really promote culturally responsive or gender responsive evaluation in order to, in our journey towards our global goal of leaving no one behind. I think the way we should go, the way for us to move forward is the culturally responsive or gender responsive evaluation is our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anuradha, would you like to, and Devdata?
Yeah, I just have 2 very quick points to make. One is to see that what we are hearing, and this is an area of, I think, what we're hearing from the grassroots is about the difficulty in actually producing evidence which is considered credible by funders, and on the other side, for funders to say that when you say you're working on gender empowerment or gender rights or women's rights, it is a very nebulous area, and the lack of sharpness in reporting against change on that. So I think as evaluators, it's a constant dialogue. It's a constant way to find more, to produce the evidence in a more credible way. At the same time, to also educate the funding community that transformative work takes time, and you cannot box it into a log frame. It's very difficult. So I think the need to kind of have these conversations, need to continue educating each other on the constraints as well as on the ways one can do it better. I think that's really important. And the second thing I do want to make an appeal to the community of evaluators, as I'm part of that community, is to say that I really think that just as we hold social development programs accountable to outcomes, there is no mechanism which holds donors accountable for the money they're spending. And I don't know beyond landscape studies which look at where's the money going, who's investing, what issues getting invested. We do not have any accountability mechanism. So I'd be very interested if maybe in the coming months, weeks, years, and maybe the next conference, we actually have a panel which talks about what are some of the ways to evaluate how effective is the money, and hold the donor community accountable in some ways for the kind of spending they're doing. And to look at robust evaluation around that, because I think that is a very critical part of, not to say that one has to critique it all the time and to look at it as an adversarial sort of conversation, But I think it is to be turning the lens on oneself as a philanthropist to say, what is it I'm doing? You know, how good and transparent am I in my grant making? How transformative is my grant making? It's not about what the partner is doing on the ground. So that, I think, conversation needs to get turned the other way around. It's very important, I think, and that is to me, that's very critical in shifting the power also between those who have resources and those who need those resources. I just wanted to say that.
I absolutely love that. I love that, Anuradha, because I think we really have to ask these difficult and provocative questions. And it's about time. You know, we often say evaluation is done to us, and it comes from somebody with more privilege and power, really, because they're the funders. And how do we make them accountable? Thank you very much for that. And I'm very interested in taking this dialogue further. So we'll have a conversation on that. Datta, would you like to add anything to what Anuradha said?
Just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity. And I totally resonate with what Anuradha said, because as a women's fund, we are also at the same time engaging with the philanthropic community, but we are also funders ourselves. So somewhere we are caught in the middle to be, reporting that we are doing. So it's like how much ever flexible and inclusive we want to be, we are accountable to the donor community. So somewhere holding them also accountable to the money that is going. So yeah, that's what just wanted to add that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being so frank, Datta. And Ranjini, anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, apart from what I've talked on intersectionality, equity, all this environment, I just want to say that we need to have studies, may not be evaluation, evaluation studies or whatever, of programs which have bridged inequities, which have reduced inequities, gender, caste, whatever, and programs which have not, or projects which have not, to understand what is the development paradigm within which evaluations need to be located. Because we are finding a context, for example, in education, that more children are going to schools, but there is a decline in quality with people going to private. So we have to look at what development model works for gender transformation and social transformation, and what doesn't, and the environment.
And the environment. Thank you so much, Ranjini, for saying that, all of these unexpected outcomes in a way, but where the climate is really coming very close to home and to the sectors that we are working in. And we need to address those issues, ask those questions, whenever we are doing our evaluations. And thank you so much for, raising that question, that what are our development paradigms? What is happening? And very true what you said, that the quality reduces. So, when we are creating a situation for greater equity, we are also creating a situation where the quality of a facility, of a service deteriorates because of our attempts in a certain way that we program. And I think those are very important questions, that what is our responsibility as funders, as evaluators, as program designers, when you look at it, that who is going to benefit and not benefit out of it, and at the end of that program, and what could be the repercussions of that. I could go on and on about this, but I think we should end now. We've been going, I know we have another 15 minutes to go, but I think we've, have shared a lot of our insights. And I think some of the things that I'm going to take back from all of this discussion is that not only should evaluation be very responsive to the needs and the context in which we work, and thank you for that shout out for Local Wisdom, the book that we launched yesterday, Punsho, from Kensa and COE. But we also need to look at our role as an evaluator. And I think that is really important. What are we bringing to our craft? Who are we involving in it? How are we democratizing the way we do our evaluation? And how we can build that bridge with our funders and our resource, mobilizers, and helping them to understand the value and the type of evidence that we produce in evaluation. And I think the fact that philanthropy and funders and commissioners are more keen to understand, and particularly after the various crises, COVID and the ongoing climate crisis, I think we have a fantastic window of opportunity to actually raise our voice as evaluators for the type of evaluation that we are promoting and we think is very valuable. And so with that, I would like to thank our presenters, thank our participants, thanks so much. And we've got, if any of you, anyone who knows may be interested in the gender and evaluation course, Janvi has sent us a brochure of it. Trust me, it's a fantastic course, not just because Ranjani and I are facilitators on it, but because we have really tried to make it relevant to the South Asian context and for the realities that are on the ground. So it's very practical, very experiential, and I'm sure anyone whom is interested, kindly do spread the word. So with that shout out, I'd like to close this session.